Chapter 24 of News from Nowhere. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Elizabeth Klett. News from Nowhere by William Morris. Chapter 24. Up the Thames, the second day. They were not slow to take my hint, and indeed, as to the mere time of day, it was best for us to be off, as it was past 7 o'clock, and the day promised to be very hot. So we got up and went down to our boat, Ellen thoughtful and abstracted, the old man very kind and courteous, as if to make up for his crabbedness of opinion. Clara was cheerful and natural, but a little subdued, I thought; and she at least was not sorry to be gone, and often looked shyly and timidly at Ellen and her strange wild beauty. So we got into the boat, Dick saying as he took his place, "Well, it is a fine day," and the old man answering, "What, you like that, do you?" once more; and presently Dick was sending the bows swiftly through the slow weed-checked stream. I turned round as we got into mid-stream, and waving my hand to our hosts, saw Ellen leaning on the old man's shoulder, and caressing his healthy apple-red cheek, and quite a keen pang smote me as I thought how I should never see the beautiful girl again. Presently I insisted on taking the sculls, and I rowed a good deal that day, which no doubt accounts for the fact that we got very late to the place which Dick had aimed at. Clara was particularly affectionate to Dick, as I noticed from the rowing thwart; and as for him, he was as frankly kind and merry as ever, and I was glad to see it, as a man of his temperament could not have taken her caresses cheerfully and without embarrassment, if he had been at all entangled by the fairy of our last night's abode. I need say little about the lovely reaches of the river here. I duly noted that absence of Cockney villas which the old man had lamented, and I saw with pleasure that my old enemies the Gothic cast-iron bridges had been replaced by handsome oak and stone ones. Also the banks of the forest that we passed through had lost their courtly gamekeeperish trimness, and were as wild and beautiful as need be, though the trees were clearly well seen to. I thought it best, in order to get the most direct information, to play the innocent about Eton and Windsor, but Dick volunteered his knowledge to me as we lay in Datchet Lock about the first. Quoth he: "Up yonder are some beautiful old buildings, which were built for a great college or teaching place by one of the mediaeval kings, Edward VI, I think." I smiled to myself at his rather natural blunder. He meant poor people's sons to be taught there what knowledge was going in his days; but it was a matter of course that in the times of which you seem to know so much, they spoilt whatever good there was in the founders' intentions. My old kinsman says that they treated them in a very simple way, and instead of teaching poor men's sons to know something, they taught rich men's sons to know nothing. It seems from what he says that it was a place for the aristocracy, if you know what that word means, I have been told its meaning, to get rid of the company of their male children for a great part of the year. I dare say old Hammond would give you plenty of information in detail about it." "What is it used for now?" said I. "Well," said he, "the buildings were a good deal spoilt by the last few generations of aristocrats, who seem to have had a great hatred against beautiful old buildings, and indeed all records of past history; but it is still a delightful place. Of course we cannot use it quite as the founder intended, since our ideas about teaching young people are so changed from the ideas of his time; so it is used now as a dwelling for people engaged in learning, and folk from round about come and get taught things that they want to learn, and there is a great library there of the best books; so that I don't think that the old dead king would be much hurt if he were to come to life and see what we are doing there." "Well," said Clara, laughing, "I think he would miss the boys." "Not always, my dear," said Dick, "for there are often plenty of boys there, who come to get taught; and also," said he, smiling, "to learn boating and swimming. I wish we could stop there, but perhaps we had better do that coming down the water." The lock gates opened as he spoke, and out we went, and on. And as for Windsor, he said nothing, till I lay on my oars, for I was sculling then, in Clewer Reach, and looking up, said, "What is all that building up there?" Said he, "There I thought I would wait till you asked yourself; that is Windsor Castle; that also I thought I would keep for you till we come down the water; It looks fine from up here, doesn't it? But a great deal of it has been built or skinned in the time of the degradation, and we wouldn't pull the buildings down, since they were there, just as with the buildings of the Dung Market. You know, of course, that it was the palace of our old mediaeval kings, and was used later on for the same purpose by the parliamentary commercial sham kings, as my old kinsman calls them." "Yes," said I know all that. What is it used for now?" "A great many people live there," said he. "As with all drawbacks, it is a pleasant place. There is also a well arranged store of antiquities of various kinds that have seemed worth keeping. A museum, it would have been called in the times you understand so well." I drew my sculls through the water at that last word, and pulled as if I were fleeing from those times which I understood so well, and we were soon going up the once sorely becockneyed reaches of the river about Maidenhead, which now looked as pleasant and enjoyable as the up river reaches. The morning was now getting on, the morning of a jewel of a summer day, one of those days which, if they were commoner in these islands, would make our climate the best of all climates, without dispute. A light wind blew from the west; the little clouds that had arisen at about our breakfast time had seemed to get higher and higher in the heavens, and in spite of the burning sun, we no more longed for rain than we feared it. Burning as the sun was, there was a fresh feeling in the air that almost set us a longing for the rest of the hot afternoon, and the stretch of blossoming wheat seen from the shadow of the boughs. No one unburdened with very heavy anxieties could have felt otherwise than happy that morning; and it must be said that whatever anxieties might lie beneath the surface of things, we didn't seem to come across any of them. We passed by several fields where haymaking was going on, but Dick, and especially Clara, were so jealous of our up river festival that they would not allow me to have much to say to them. I could only notice that the people in the fields looked strong and handsome, both men and women, and that so far from there being any appearance of sordidness about their attire, they seemed to be dressed specially for the occasion, lightly, of course, but gaily and with plenty of adornment. Both on this day as well as yesterday we had, as you may think, met and been passed by many craft of one kind and another. The most part of these were being rowed like ourselves, or were sailing, in the sort of way that sailing is managed on the upper reaches of the river; but every now and then we came on barges, laden with hay or other country produce, or carrying bricks, lime, timber, and the like, and these were going on their way without any means of propulsion visible to me, just a man at the tiller, with often a friend or two laughing and talking with him. Dick, seeing on one occasion this day that I was looking rather hard at one of these, said, "That is one of our force barges. It is quite as easy to work vehicles by force by water as by land." I understood pretty well that these "force vehicles" had taken the place of our old steam power carrying; but I took good care not to ask any questions about them, as I knew well enough that both I should never be able to understand how they worked, and that in attempting to do so I should betray myself, or get into some complication impossible to explain; so I merely said, "Yes, of course, I understand." We went ashore at Bisham, where the remains of the old abbey and the Elizabethan house that had been added to them yet remained, none the worse for many years of careful and appreciative habitation. The folk of the place, however, were mostly in the fields that day, both men and women, so we met only two old men there, and a younger one who had stayed at home to get on with some literary work, which I imagine we considerably interrupted. Yet I also think that the hard-working man who received us was not very sorry for the interruption. Anyhow, he kept on pressing us to stay over and over again, till at last we did not get away till the cool of the evening. However, that mattered little to us; the nights were light, for the moon was shining in her third quarter, and it was all one to Dick whether he sculled or sat quiet in the boat, so we went away at a great pace. The evening sun shone bright on the remains of the old buildings at Medmenham, close beside which arose an irregular pile of building which Dick told us was a very pleasant house, and there were plenty of houses visible on the wide meadows opposite, under the hill; for as it seems that the beauty of Hurley had compelled people to build and live there a good deal. The sun very low down showed us Henley, little altered in outward aspect from what I remembered it. Actual daylight failed us as we passed through the lovely reaches of Wargrave and Shiplake, but the moon rose behind us presently. I should like to have seen with my eyes what success the new order of things had had in getting rid of the sprawling mess with which commercialism had littered the banks of the wide stream about Reading and Caversham. Certainly everything smelt too deliciously in the early night for there to be any of the old careless sordidness of so-called manufacture, and in answer to my question as to what sort of place Reading was, Dick answered: "Oh, a nice town enough in its way, mostly rebuilt within the last 100 years, and there are a good many houses, as you can see by the lights just down under the hills yonder. In fact, it is one of the most populous places on the Thames round about here. Keep up your spirits, guest, we are close to our journey's end for the night. I ought to ask your pardon for not stopping at one of the houses here or higher up, but a friend, who is living in a very pleasant house in the Maple Durham Meads, particularly wanted me and Clara to come and see him on our way up the Thames, and I thought you wouldn't mind this bit of night travelling." He need not have adjured me to keep up my spirits, which were as high as possible, though the strangeness and excitement of the happy and quiet life which I saw everywhere about me was, it is true, a little wearing off; yet a deep content, as different as possible from languid acquiescence, was taking its place, and I was, as it were, really new born. We landed presently just where I remembered the river making an elbow to the north towards the ancient house of the Blunts, with the wide meadows spreading on the right-hand side, and on the left the long line of beautiful old trees overhanging the water. As we got out of the boat I said to Dick: "Is it the old house we are going to?" "No," he said, "though that is standing still in green old age, and is well inhabited. I see, by the way, that you know your Thames well. But my friend Walter Allen, who asked me to stop here, lives in a house, not very big, which has been built here lately, because these meadows are so much liked, especially in summer, that there was getting to be rather too much of tenting on the open field; so the parishes hereabout, who rather objected to that, built 3 houses between this and Caversham, and quite a large one at Basildon, a little higher up. Look, yonder are the lights of Walter Allen's house." So we walked over the grass of the meadows under a flood of moonlight, and soon came to the house, which was low and built round a quadrangle big enough to get plenty of sunshine in it. Walter Allen, Dick's friend, was leaning against the jamb of the doorway waiting for us, and took us into the hall without overplus of words. There were not many people in it, as some of the dwellers there were away at the haymaking in the neighbourhood, and some, as Walter told us, were wandering about the meadow enjoying the beautiful moonlit night. Dick's friend looked to be a man of about 40, tall, black-haired, very kind-looking and thoughtful; but rather to my surprise there was a shade of melancholy on his face, and he seemed a little abstracted and inattentive to our chat, in spite of obvious efforts to listen. Dick looked on him from time to time and seemed troubled, and at last he said: "I say, old fellow, if there is anything the matter which we didn't know of when you wrote to me, don't you think you had better tell us about it at once? Or else we shall think that we have come here at an unlucky time, and are not quite wanted." Walter turned red, and seemed to have some difficulty in restraining his tears, but said at last: "Of course everybody here is very glad to see you, Dick, and your friends. But it is true that we are not at our best, in spite of the fine weather and the glorious hay crop. We have had a death here." Said Dick: "Well, you should get over that, neighbour; such things must be." "Yes," Walter said, "but this was a death by violence, and it seems likely to lead to at least one more, and somehow it makes us feel rather shy of one another, and to say the truth, that is one reason why there are so few of us present to-night." "Tell the story, Walter," said Dick. "Perhaps telling it will help you to shake off your sadness." Said Walter: "Well, I will, and I will make it short enough, though I dare say it might be spun out into a long one, as used to be done with such subjects in the old novels. There is a very charming girl here whom we all like, and whom some of us do more than like, and she very naturally liked one of us better than anybody else; and another of us, I won't name him, got fairly bitten with love madness, and used to go about making himself as unpleasant as he could; not out of malice, perpence, of course, so that the girl, who liked him well enough at first, though she didn't love him, began fairly to dislike him. Of course those of us who knew him best, myself amongst others, advised him to go away, as he was making matters worse and worse for himself every day. Well, he wouldn't take our advice. That also, I suppose, was a matter of course. So we had to tell him that he must go, or the inevitable sending to Coventry would follow, for his individual trouble had so overmastered him that we felt that we must go if he did not. He took that better than we expected, when something or other, an interview with the girl, I think, and some hot words with the successful lover following close upon it, threw him quite off his balance, and he got hold of an axe, and fell upon his rival when there was no one by, and in the struggle that followed, the man attacked, hit him an unlucky blow, and killed him. And now the slayer in his turn is so upset that he is like to kill himself, and if he does, the girl will do as much, I fear. And all this we could no more help than the earthquake of the year before last." "It is very unhappy," said Dick. "But since the man is dead, and cannot be brought to life again, and since the slayer had no malice in him, I cannot for the life of me see why he shouldn't get over it before long. Besides, it was the right man that was killed, and not the wrong. Why should a man brood over a mere accident for ever? And the girl?" "As to her," said Walter, "the whole thing seems to have inspired her with terror rather than grief. What you say about the man is true, or it should be. But then you see the excitement and jealousy that was the prelude to this tragedy had made an evil and feverish element round about him, from which he does not seem to be able to escape. However, we have advised him to go away, in fact, to cross the seas. But he is in such a state that I do not think he can go unless some one takes him, and I think it will fall to my lot to do so, which is scarcely a cheerful outlook for me." "Oh, you will find a certain kind of interest in it," said Dick. "And of course he must soon look upon the affair from a reasonable point of view, sooner or later." "Well, at any rate," quoth Walter, "now that I have eased my mind by making you uncomfortable, let us have an end of the subject for the present. Are you going to take your guest to Oxford?" "Why, of course, we must pass through it," said Dick, smiling, "as we are going into the upper waters; but I thought that we wouldn't stop there, or we shall be belated as to the haymaking up our way. So Oxford and my learned lecture on it, all got second hand from my old kinsman, must wait till we come down the water a fortnight hence." I listened to this story with much surprise, and could not help wondering at first that the man who had slain the other had not been put in custody till it could be proved that he killed his rival in self-defence only. However, the more I thought of it, the plainer it grew to me that no amount of examination of witnesses, who had witnessed nothing but the ill blood between the two rivals, would have done anything to clear up the case. I could not help thinking also that the remorse of this homicide gave point to what old Hammond had said to me about the way in which this strange people dealt with what I had been used to hear called crimes. Truly the remorse was exaggerated, but it was quite clear that the slayer took the whole consequences of the act upon himself, and did not expect society to whitewash him by punishing him. I had no fear any longer that the sacredness of human life was likely to suffer amongst my friends from the absence of gallows and prison. Chapter 25